Today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of a man who was, for all intents and purposes, a traitor to his own people, a total social outcast. But then, a single encounter and just two simple words changed his life and, honestly, the world forever.
So let me ask you, when you hear the name St. Matthew, what's the first thing that pops into your head? You probably think, oh, one of the 12 apostles, or maybe the guy who wrote the first gospel. And you're absolutely right. But that, my friends, barely scratches the surface of his unbelievable transformation.
You see, his story is just this powerful reminder of how a call from God can completely turn a life upside down. And with his feast day coming up on September 21st, it feels like the perfect time to really dig into who this man was.
Now, this whole explainer is inspired by a really fantastic article from epistles.online. We're going to hit all the major points, but I seriously encourage you to visit his site to get the full in-depth context for yourself. All right, so to really grasp the scale of this change, we have to start at the beginning. We need to see who Matthew was before he was an apostle. And let me tell you, his job basically made him a public enemy. He was a publican, which is just a fancy word for tax collector, working in a town called Capharnaum. Now, this wasn't just some unpopular gig, okay? To his fellow Jews, he was a sellout, a collaborator working for the Roman-backed ruler, Herod. He was labeled a sinner and was completely shunned by his community.
And get this, you can literally see his entire life story in his two names. He starts out as Levi, the despised publican, but after he's called, he becomes Matthew, which means gift of God. I mean, what a perfect summary of the two completely different lives he lived. It's night and day.
So how in the world does a man go from being a social pariah to the gift of God? Well, it wasn't some long, drawn-out process. It all happened in a single moment, with just two simple words. And this is so important. You see, unlike some of the other apostles who were kind of already curious about Jesus, Matthew wasn't looking for him at all. Christ didn't wait for him to clean up his act or get his life together. No, he met him right where he was, calling him in the middle of his despised day job.
This breaks down that pivotal moment so perfectly. First, you have the scene. Jesus spots him at his tax collection booth. Then the call itself, just two words. Follow me. And then the response, which is just mind-blowing. Matthew gets up immediately and leaves his entire career, his whole life, behind in an instant.
And to celebrate, Matthew throws this huge party and invites Jesus to come eat with all his old buddies, other tax collectors and sinners. Of course, the religious leaders start criticizing Jesus for this, and his response is this profound quote, which pretty much explains his entire mission and why he called a guy like Matthew in the first place.
So, Matthew dropped everything, but he didn't just fade into the background. Right away, he was given a brand new, world-changing purpose.
After Pentecost, he became this absolute powerhouse of a missionary. He started close to home, in Judea, but tradition tells us his journeys took him all over the known world, to places like Ethiopia, Persia, and Macedonia. He was truly living out that command to take the gospel to all nations.
But this new life, this total commitment to his mission, well, it would eventually demand the highest possible price. It would lead him to martyrdom.
Tradition gives us this incredibly dramatic story of his final moments. While he was in Ethiopia, he had consecrated the local princess to God. But a new king comes along who wants to marry her, and he orders Matthew to undo the vow. Standing at the altar, Matthew flat out refuses, defending her and his faith. And in a fit of rage, the king had him killed, right then and there.
Okay, so the ancient accounts aren't all in agreement on the exact method. Some say sword, others fire, or stoning. But here's the thing that really matters. The church has been unanimous from the very beginning. He died a martyr's death, the ultimate witness to his transformed faith.
His death, though, was not the end. Not even close. St. Matthew left behind a legacy that is just as powerful and alive today as it was then.
So if you're ever looking at sacred art and see one of the apostles depicted, here's a little pro tip for spotting Matthew. Look for a winged man, which symbolizes how his gospel really hones in on Jesus' humanity. Or you might see a lance, which of course represents his martyrdom. But let's be real, his greatest legacy is his gospel. It's often called the gospel of the kingdom because it's just jam-packed with Christ's core teachings, like the Sermon on the Mount. And a recurring theme, something he comes back to again and again, is this radical care for the poor, which all leads up to that powerful final scene of the judgment of nations, where we are judged by how we treated the least of these.
So what's the big takeaway here? Matthew's life is this timeless, incredible lesson that absolutely no one is beyond God's mercy. And that when we truly say yes to that call, it asks for everything we've got.
And this all brings us back to our source, epistles.online. The author explains that he created this resource for Catholics who are looking for a balanced perspective, something he describes as neither modernist nor ultra-traditionalist. He says his work is all about directly confronting the challenges facing the faith today.
If this story resonated with you, and if you find that kind of mission valuable, the author of the site invites you to think about supporting his apostolate. He warmly welcomes help in a few different ways. First and foremost, he asks for your prayers for his mission. You can also share any of his posts that you find helpful, and of course, subscribe to get his latest updates.
And that leaves us with one final thought. You see, St. Matthew's story isn't just some dusty piece of history. It's a question aimed directly at each and every one of us. Just like he found Matthew at that tax booth, Jesus finds us right in the middle of our ordinary, sometimes messy lives. And he still says those same two words, follow me. The only real question left is how are we going to answer?